For the last video in this series, we're going to start talking about backgrounds. We're going to look at backgrounds and background colors and background images. We can set background images on anything we want to set them on them. So if I want to set backgrounds on my paragraphs, I can set backgrounds on those. I can set backgrounds on a section. I can set backgrounds on the entire page or the body. And we'll do some more with that later on, some more. Today we're just going to work on, we'll just do some body backgrounds. You can also do some, we may do some with some of the headings as well. But we've done background colors with headings before, so that won't be anything new. We're going to look at background image. We're going to look at background position, background attachment, background color, which we've already looked at before, background repeat. And then we'll look at the shortcut for the background, the background elements. You can specify in order: image, color, position, repeat, and attachment, just like you can with most of the other things we've looked at today. All these things that we do with them that have to do with background, we can specify them in one line with a shortcut code if we're using them all. Let's go over to our code, and let's start with body. We'll go to the body of our page. And for the body, we want to set a background image. Now, what we have to do here is give it a URL, and inside the parentheses for the URL, we have to tell the name of the file we want to load. I want to show you something we haven't talked about before. So in my folder, here's my Kraken image. It's in the same page as my web folder. Same page in my web folder is my index file for this sample page that I'm doing. So I have the Kraken graphic there, and I have this one called gray texture.png, and it's just a gray square with some white modeled in there, and this is called a tile, and it's not as big as my web page. It's designed so that when it gets stuck together, you should not be able to see a seam. So this right edge will blend perfectly with the left edge, and it will repeat this tile, kind of like you'd see tiles in a bathroom, except it would be seamless. You won't see a seam. There's no grout line like you would see in a bathroom. So as long as this is a good tile, and honestly, I downloaded it from the internet, and it said it was a good tile, but I haven't tested it, so we'll find out if it's a perfect tile or not. There's all kinds of backgrounds you can download on the internet. The other thing I want to talk about is we start adding all these pictures in here with our HTML files, and it can get kind of cluttered. So what we can do, I'm going to right click in here, and I'm going to say new folder, and I'm going to make a folder just to hold my images, and I'm going to put my Kraken in here, and I'm going to put this gray texture in here. Now what does that do for us? When I go over here and load my page now, it doesn't know how to find the Kraken anymore. That's because it's in the images folder. So back in my HTML, I have the right ones opened here. Back in my HTML, I'm going to go down here. This is where I loaded my Kraken. In front of it, I'm going to put the name of my folder, images, and then I'm going to put a slash. Okay. So basically, I'm telling it now, instead of looking in the same folder as my index file, as my HTML file, I look in the images folder and then find a file called kraken.png. So I'll save that and I'll refresh it. And that really helps us for this little project, the sample I'm doing right here. It might not be a big deal, but as you get more and more images on your site, you get more files getting in here. Some people also make a CSS folder, so we can do that too. Let's make a special folder for our CSS. New folder for CSS files. Now what do we have to do up here when we try to load our CSS? We have to tell it the same thing. Look in my CSS folder for mystyle.css. If I can save that Oh, it didn't find it. What did I do wrong? Didn't find it because I lost my formatting. The little bit of formatting I had, I lost. Oh. I never moved the file. I didn't put my file in that folder. There we go. Now I'll refresh it. There it is. So now it's loading my CSS file out of that folder. So we can organize our files this way. But when we do that on our page, we have to tell it then where to look. Right? So let's do this background color. That's what we were getting at. Now it's saying my style sheet doesn't exist anymore. So it wants me to open it back up. We got to open it up from the new spot because it lost it. So I'll edit with Notepad, and there it is. When I moved it, Notepad++ didn't know how to find it. So what were we going to do? We were going to do, hadn't saved my body yet, so I'll have to retype it. Body, and I wanted to do background, image, and I said we have to do a URL with some parentheses, and inside the parentheses for the URL we have to tell it the file we want to load. Mine is in the images folder, and I called it I can look. I called it gray_texture.png. Gray_texture.png. Save that, and I'll come over here and I'll load it. And I am. Oh, of course. So my CSS file, since I went ahead and put that in a CSS folder, images is not in the CSS folder. So I need to tell it to go back up to my main folder and then go down to images. And the way I do that is two dots. Two dots says, look in the folder above this one. And then when you get up there, look inside the images folder and then look for the gray texture file in there. So our URLs get a little more complicated, but our organization of our files gets way more organized. So now when I refresh it, hopefully you can see there's a gray texture on there and my page doesn't look so blank and stark. Now another thing that's good to do here, because for example, if there's something happens and that doesn't load, so I'm going to misspell that name on purpose so that the page doesn't load. That looks a lot different than I probably wanted my page to look. So it's always a good idea for two reasons. So let's do a background color. Let's do light gray. I'm trying to remember. Gray is a little too dark. There was a light gray. Try that. Oh, I know what it is. I think it's light gray, but spelled with an A. There are two acceptable ways to spell the word gray, is G-R-A-Y or G-R-E-Y. There we go. So now I have a light gray background, right? And that's very close to the gray texture that I was using. So Right now, I've misspelled gray texture in this file so that my picture wouldn't load. And it doesn't look a whole lot different than when my picture was there. And now I will spell it correctly and refresh it. And you can see it doesn't look a lot different. So it's always a good idea to put a background color that's very similar to your image that you're using for your background. Two reasons. One, if you're using a big image that's not a tile like this, it might take a little while to load. But while it's loading, the gray color will be there. And once it loads, the gray image will pop in. So people on slower connections don't have to look at a stark white version of your page. They see something closer to what you wanted in this case. In this case, it was gray, so I picked a light gray color to match the gray texture that I'm using. All right, so those are some tricks that you should do. It's a good practice to do both the background color and the image, even though if the image loads, you won't see the color. There is a background position that, because I'm using a tile, really doesn't make sense for us to use. And some of the values you can use for the background position are top left, top center, 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 center right, bottom right. You would use those maybe if you're using a background image on an H1 or something, on a heading, an H3, or a small area of your page, and you wanted an image to load in a certain area. You could use those. Let me just do center, center. See what happens here. Now we don't notice a difference because our background is repeating everywhere. So you won't see a whole lot with background position, but know that it exists. And you didn't see any of that because I hadn't switched you back. I haven't switched you back. I tried the center, center, and it made no changes. And that's probably because I have repeat on. So let's look at repeat here. Background repeat. Right now, our background is set. So my square was, I don't know, a couple inches each way, and then it repeats itself. It repeats itself going across the screen and going down the screen. It just tiles the whole page. But we don't have to leave that on like that. We can tell it not to repeat. So let me do that. Background repeat. And we'll say, for its setting, we'll say no dash repeat. Okay, now I don't know if you can see it because of my background color, so I guess I'll take that back out for now to make it more evident on the video. You can see my background image doesn't repeat, it's just one square, and notice since I said center, center, it's like in the center of my page. I want you to see this, so I'm going to change my page. Whatever I do with my page width here, it stays pretty much in that spot. So if I say no repeat, if I just say that, if I change that to repeat dash X, well, first before I do that, let's change this. Let's change it to top left. For the background position. And you can see the gray square jumps up here to the top left and doesn't repeat. Okay. And I believe if we take background position out of there completely, it stays at top left. So top left is the default. So now that we have it up there, top left, we have no repeat. Let's change that value for repeat to repeat dash X. And this basically says repeat the image across the X-axis, but not the Y-axis. So we'll go across, but we won't go down. And there we can see it. So I have my image repeating across the top. Now this is really useful. Maybe up in the heading of your page, you want to use a repeatable tile and you only want it to go across to cover maybe a certain, like your header bar or something. That might be useful. The other times I've seen it used is when we use repeat Y. We used to call this fake columns. Used to do fake columns. You repeat on the Y-axis, and then if you put margin, let's do this. Let's take my paragraph margins and change it to like 200 pixels. Cancel that. I'm just going to do margin left, 200 pixels. Right? Now I can get my margins. Actually, it probably needs to be a little bit more than that. I can move all my text out to this area, and this left one, this left area looks like a column. I'm not going to do it to all my elements right now. We'll actually see that here in a week or two when we do some other kinds of page layouts. But we can use non-repeating backgrounds to make fake headers or fake columns on our page. So that's some techniques you'll see coming up. And we'll just change that margin back. Right. And we talked about repeat. Let's go back to, I'm going to get rid of the background repeat, which causes it to repeat normal X and Y. And I'm going to set background attachment. This is popular when it came out. We'll set it to fixed. Before I save that, go over here. You can see when I scroll up and down, my background moves with the page. Make my page nice and small so you can see that. Actually, I can give it a little more scroll room. The background is moving with the page. Now I'll actually save this CSS so that my background attachment is fixed. And now if you see, the words are scrolling, but the background is staying. It's not moving. And that might be hard to see in the video. I'm not sure how well that will show up. Hopefully it does. You can see the word scroll in front of the background image. And that's a really nice effect. The last thing I want to talk about is this background property we can use. I'll just pop this over here real quick. For the last one, values must be listed in the following: image, color, position, repeat, and attachment. So rather than having 5 different lines talking about my background, I can say the image, followed by the color, and we said that was light gray, followed by the position, which I want top left, I guess. Followed by the repeat. And the options for repeat are, I just want to repeat it as normal, so I can put the word repeat there. And the last one is attachment. I want it to be fixed. Refresh this. It went away. Oh no. All right. Let me see, what am I doing? Top left has a space in it. could be the problem. And my problem actually is I didn't change it to just background. I still had image there. The background, we give it the file, the color, where we want it to be, whether we want it to repeat or not, and whether we want it fixed or not. Let's see if it works now. There we go. Background is fixed. So all those settings are taking effect. So we can combine them all into one statement if we're careful and do it in the right order. And that's the end of the videos for now. The other thing that I've already talked about that comes from this chapter is style conflicts. The idea that sometimes one CSS property will override another CS property. And there are certain ways that certain things take priority over other things. Let me pull this up. So the order of precedence. A user-defined style has preference over an inline style. So a style that's contained in a tag overrides everything. Inline styles, which we talked about the first week we did CSS, inline styles that come in your HTML code have next priority. Embedded style sheets, which are in the head section of our page, have the next priority. Then external style sheets. So anything we put on the page, the closer it is to the item you're defining the style on, the better chance it has to win. And we've talked about that a lot. And if you don't have any of those things, the browser style sheet, the browser's built-in styles take over. And we've talked about the fact that some browsers have different default settings for their styles than others. We'll learn how to reset all those here eventually. And you already know how to create an external style sheet. So we're done with that. So I'll leave you to it. Your assignment this week is to do background images and colors, do the borders, paddings, and margins, and get your page set up to look nicer than it does now. Use all those elements in some form. Use as many of these elements as you can.